Hi. My research paper covered the topic of policing and protests. I first talked about the history of policing protests, how it was more forceful before and during the 1960s, but as times changed, so did police protesting. It actually got to a more softer level and focused on negotiations instead of brute force. However, because of anti-globalization movements rejecting negotiations, police created a new tactic which combined hard and soft line tactics, and as well as the use of non-lethals, law, code, regulation, and public relations strategies, so that they would be able to have more control over protest spaces. Next, I talked about four policing protest strategies. The first one was escalated force, which is based on the assumption that crowds are irrational and destructive, and that aggression by the demonstrators justifies equal or greater force by police to disperse crowds. The next was command and control, which involves the restriction of time, place, and manner of protest to minimize the potential for community disruption. Then after that, it was negotiated management, which emphasizes the use of dialogue between police and demonstrators throughout the planning and demonstration process. And the last one was strategic incapacitation, which is used to target the problematic group and not the protesters as a whole. I also covered some police tactics as well. And the first one was one of the ones I talked about was kettling, which is when officers will corral protesters before arresting them. I also talked about undercover officers, which is where they use officers and send them out into a crowd, and so that they can hide, gain information about what they're planning, and see if anyone has any ill intentions toward another party. I also gave an example of a protest that police handled correctly and one where they didn't. The protest that police handled correctly was the 2017 Pottsville, Kentucky white supremacist rally. They kept protesters separated from each other and stood between both groups, shoulder to shoulder, to just keep them from getting violent. They also stayed calm and didn't let the protesters antagonize them. And they made sure to keep civilians away so that they wouldn't get hurt. Now, the protest that police handled poorly was the 2017 Charlottesville, Virginia Unite the Right rally. Police didn't separate the groups that were protesting. They didn't have a plan on how to handle the actual protest itself. And they actually stood outside the barricade. So clearly you can see how Pottsville handled the protests. Police handled the protests significantly better than how Charlottesville did. Finally, I talked about conflict theory and how it could apply to policing dissent. I talked about how these officers could use their power to treat protesters any way they wanted and may view them as beneath them, and that could be possibly why police are more brutal with their use of force with some protesters and not others. Thank you.